So when I first got this camera, one of the first things I did was look up what are the best settings, what's the best picture profile to use for it. And there's a couple that came across as the best. Number 1, GLog Ultimate, number 2, AB Range, and the last one was CPF Log. Tried all three of them, went through them all, and really wasn't that happy with all of them. So I ended up creating my own. And I put my own out there, and it seems like people like it. But I never actually really tested it against all of the other profiles to see which one was best, which one had the best color accuracy, which one had the best dynamic range, and just overall which one worked like I wanted it to. So that's what this video is. I went ahead and took video of color charts, real life dynamic range tests outside, and that's what I'm going to show you here. So let's go ahead and take a look at all 4 of these profiles and standard, so the profile's off, and see how it all looks. And if you're wondering, this is actually using my profile, so the FSLog I think is what I'm calling it. So in terms of skin tones, in terms of highlights, roll off back there, in terms of colors over here, this is what you get with that. Alright, so let's first start out by looking at all of the different picture profiles just straight out of the camera. This first group of tests is with just color charts, so we can actually get a look at what we're getting straight out of the camera without any modifications, any sort of color correction, anything. Once we get that first round out of the way, we're going to go ahead and take a look at all of the clips right next to each other so that we can get a look at any sort of differences that there may be. So while these are playing through, I want you to notice and look at the color cards. Look at the color differences, the shifts between everything. Alright, so now we have all of them lined up right next to each other. This first clip is again straight out of the camera, so you can see the slight differences. And now we have it so that you can look at what each one of these looks like once you bring the black levels down to 0 IRE. And the big thing here is going to be that overall gamma of the image. So something like the FSLog or the CPF log, the black levels are much higher. They both use the standard picture profile, which means those midtones are going to be much higher than the black levels. So now what I did here was I went ahead and zoomed in on just a portion of the color chart that's the white to black, so the overall grayscale. And what I want you to notice here is in this first clip, it's that chart but with no grade to it. So this is straight out of the camera, and I want you to notice the noise here. You'll notice more noise overall in FSLog and CPF log compared to GLog Ultimate just because of where those midtones and the overall black levels land on the chart. However, in the next clip, where we actually do a bit of a grade, in the following clip after that, you'll start noticing some big differences. So here especially, where we bring down the black levels to 0 IRE, and then we start pulling at the shadows to try and get some of that detail out, notice how quick some of these profiles fall apart. Now surprisingly, picture profile off really doesn't fall apart that much. However, obviously you're losing some dynamic range there in the highlights, but what I'm noticing here, especially in the FSLog and AB range, is that those shadows, once you start pulling them, that grain, that overall noise there, while it is digital noise, it's not nearly as bad, as blocky, as grainy as GLog Ultimate. And that's just coming down to the gamma, the picture profile that was used. And that's coming from the Cine 2 versus the standard. And this last clip here, this is actually that same grade as the previous clip where blacks were brought down to 0 IRE, and there was a relatively heavy pull done in the shadows to really bring out, or attempt to bring out, some of that detail, and you can start to see a lot of that overall ugly noise and grain that comes into the picture here. So again, if you look at the GLog Ultimate, there's a lot of noise here in the shadows, whereas if you look at FSLog, for instance, or even picture profile off, there's still noise there, but it's not nearly as grainy or blocky or ugly because you didn't have to pull it nearly as hard to get that same detail. So now this second round of clips here, I went ahead and did two things to it. Number one is the initial clip out of camera, followed by a quick grade of just bringing the black levels down to 0 IRE so we can see the difference in these, how flat they are and how the overall shadows and everything perform. And now here all of them are right next to each other, and I want you to look at the skies here. Straight out of camera, and then the next group of clips will be with another similar grade, where looking at the sky specifically, in both FSLog and GLog Ultimate, the blues and the way that they're handled are actually the closest to real life that day. Now FSLog being a little flatter than GLog Ultimate, it looks a little flatter in here, but the next clip you'll actually see once the blacks are brought down and everything else are put in place, FSLog ends up looking extremely good. Now, if you're looking for a orange and teal look, for instance, this is where something like AB range or even CPF log comes in, because that blue sky looks a lot more like it's teal than anything else. So again, now that we look at these clips again with the slight grade where the blacks are just brought down to 0 IRE, looking at the sky in FSLog and GLog Ultimate, they're extremely close. But what you'll start to see here is that in terms of the grass, FSLog is the most accurate with that orange and green color. And again, when you look at the shadows there, especially in the trees in the very center of the picture, GLog Ultimate just starts to crush those darker areas, whereas FSLog starts to keep that detail. Now, CPF log also looks like it has some sort of tone shift to it, which, if I remember correctly, it does have some sort of tone shift in the highlights, but this is making these tones change quite a bit from these other profiles. So now this last group of clips here, what I ended up doing, or what I wanted to do, was get a combination of the highlights in the background with the sky, and then shadows with the leaves on this plant and that cushion, along with the saturation and the saturated look of all of these flowers. Because they're such a bright pink, I thought each one of these profiles would really showcase what it does with those highlights, especially straight out of camera, and then again once you add a basic grade to it. And now we can take a look at all of them right next to each other, and then again the next clip looking at that with the basic grade where the black levels are brought down. And here you can really see, once everything's leveled out, how little detail there is in that GLog Ultimate. One other thing to look at here is looking at the saturation that's brought into all of these clips. Look at GLog Ultimate and look at how orange that looks instead of pink, whereas picture profile off, FSLog and even AB range are very close to how that pink color is straight out of camera. And now the last thing that I really wanted to focus on was, I guess, my own picture profile that I created against what I would consider to be the most common, the most popular profile, and that being GLog Ultimate. So again, here's that same clip as from before, except looking at them both straight out of camera, ungraded. The difference here between the shadows especially, and then the color of these flowers straight out of camera are completely different. And then as we look at this graded, again, looking at FSLog, how much detail there is in the shadows of the leaves versus in GLog Ultimate, there's next to no detail there. And this is after I tried to bring up some of those shadows while keeping the black levels low. And the unfortunate part of that is I started to introduce a lot of grain, a lot of noise into this image. And again, looking at the saturation from the leaves and the flowers, there's such a difference in the color tone that this profile has. To me at least, it's not realistic, and it wouldn't be what I would consider a professional profile. It wouldn't be something I'd want to use on a professional shoot. And now I'm going to leave it with one more clip. This is going to be a clip of my kids playing where I can really get some good skin tones, so you can see the skin tones and how they come out with my profile, the FSLog. Not to say I'm trying to sell my profile, but my profile has so much less footage out there. It's not as widely used compared to GLog Ultimate, where you can find footage a dime a dozen on Facebook and wherever else. So at least for this, here's some shots of what FSLog looks like. Number one, straight out of camera, and then number two, adding I'll call it a light grade on top of it. So enjoy. Otherwise, once this is over, I'm done. So I guess I'll see you guys next time. Later.